Hello and welcome to episode 44 of ThROH The Years, the podcast that reviews Ring of Honor show by show from the beginning. I'm Trevor Dame, and as always, it's Matt Feuerstein, my co-host with the most. Matt, we said we'd come back for this episode a little bit quicker than last time, and we didn't, but I think we have a reasonable excuse this time.
Yeah, now some people might say, well, everyone is stuck at home. All you have to do is make podcasts and watch wrestling. But no, some of us are working remotely. We're working hard. We're trying to figure out how to do new things in the new world. We're terrifiedly clutching our beds and praying that we and our loved ones don't die of a horrible virus. So, not a lot of time to watch wrestling. But we're back on the horse. We got our schedules. We're going to do this. We are ready. I am very ready to talk about this show. I actually just finished watching it like 5 minutes ago, so happy to be back.
Yeah, and I guess it's weird. Matt, we've been doing this. I believe this month, 3 years ago, was our first episode. So I believe this is our 3-year anniversary. I don't think we've ever done a show in the midst of a global pandemic, Matt. Maybe I forgot one, but
there was that one in August. Yeah, that last pandemic.
Sorry.
Go right ahead.
I was just going to say that it feels kind of sometimes weird to do things that feel frivolous, but at the same time, during a time like this, but at the same time, it feels like we're all trying to find a new normal during this, to like find like as much of the normal parts of our old life as we can fit into the current situation. So I just hope that everybody that's listening, I hope that you and yours are doing okay physically and mentally and financially even at this point, because I know that's kind of like the 3-pronged attack this has had on everybody. But
yeah,
hopefully this can take your mind off it for a short time.
Well, yeah, it's like, I mean, in some ways, like, we have more time for frivolity, and at least for me, I definitely need it. Like, I need to be doing this, and I need to hear other people doing similar things in order to stay, calm, sane, with tethered to reality. So, I've had obsessive conversations with friends who are even more paranoid than me about it, that, about all the horrible things going on. So it's nice to just talk about something from a time when people could get together and stand close to each other and watch a thing in the same room, and like, an innocent time for you and me as well.
And the nice thing about being on a podcast network like the Pro Wrestling Only Podcast Network is, even when you're done here, if you need more hours of distraction, because like Matt just said, like there's a lot of hours you need to fill with distraction these days. There's so many good podcasts on the network. You don't even have to flip on to a new podcast feed. It's right there. We're snug as a bug with a bunch of other different podcast episodes. Like there's the Greatness of Randy Savage podcast, where Kelly from the old Titans of Wrestling, he's doing more short form podcasts about classic things of Randy Savage. And, who doesn't like Randy Savage? And I also want to plug a couple other things real quick that are Pro Wrestling Only Podcast Network. The first is the 20 Years of Nitro podcast asked me if I'd like to be a guest, and I said I'd have to take a rain check on that because I'm hard to deal with. And so I don't want this to be a habit, but I just want to say, yes, if you ask me to be on your podcast, I'll probably say no, at least in the short term, and then I'll feel guilty and give you a free plug on our podcast. So don't take advantage of that.
I have enough trouble getting him to agree to be on this podcast, so.
Yeah. And then, Matt, we did, if people don't get enough of you and I together, we did another podcast that, now, depending on when you listen to this show, it might already be out. It might be out still a couple days away from coming out. But Joe Gagne announced this on Twitter last night, so I think it's safe to say we did an episode of Joe Gagne's game show, The 5-Star Match Game, with also another guest of the show, Justin Shapiro.
Yes, and I love being on that show. It is so much fun, And I love listening to it too. So there's so many episodes in the archive you can listen to, even if our episode is not up yet. Highly recommend our good buddy Joe's wonderful wrestling game show.
So yeah, plenty of things to listen to that. I was going to say don't mention the COVID-19, but we just started off the show talking about it, and we talked about it a fair bit on the 5-star match game. So, but in a humorous way, hopefully. But without ado, let's get to the distraction, because we did have some wrestling to watch from way back, 2004. The show we're covering today is Death Before Dishonor 2, Night 1, because it was a 2-night double shot weekend. This Night 1 took place July 23rd, 2004, at the Milner Building in Hart Park in Wauwatosa, Wisconsin, which I believe was like 10 or 15 minutes away from Milwaukee, so basically Milwaukee. It was in front of a reported crowd of 375 fans. And if that sounds low, that is, you're correct. You've been paying attention to these shows, or you're just a nerd like me, because I believe that the only shows in Ring of Honor history that did under 400 up to this point were the Pittsburgh shows, which they did 2 of, and then never went back to Pittsburgh again. And I believe maybe the second Ring of Honor show ever, and then maybe one other one that they had to move at the last minute. So, under 400 was not good for Ring of Honor, and it's not a coincidence that I believe they did not come back to the Milwaukee area. And in fact, Matt, the number is even worse than it sounds on paper, because we'll go to the Observer first. The Observer wrote at the time, they debut in the Milwaukee market on July 23rd, drew about 375 fans, and some of that was paper, as we got reports that people that purchased Ring of Honor tapes in the area as far away as Chicago had gotten 2 free tickets to the show out of nowhere sent by mail. And then we'll jump quickly to the Pro Wrestling Torch, which wrote at the time. Ring of Honor will be offering fans who attend the July 23rd event in Milwaukee $5 back if they attend the event in Chicago and present their ticket stubs from both shows in Chicago. So Ring of Honor was really pulling out stops usually that we haven't heard on other shows to try and get as many fans as they could, and they still only drew 375 people.
I wonder why. Milwaukee's pretty close to Chicago. It seemed like ROH became pretty hot in Chicago for a while. I don't know if it was there yet. I guess we'll find out when we review the next show. But it's surprising to me that they did so badly. I guess maybe part of it is the fallout from the Feinstein scandal still.
Yeah, we'll get into it a little more on the next episode, because that's where there's actually a quote from Gabe in the Torch where he kind of talks about this, because as we'll get into in that episode, Ring of Honor was really hoping to do a pretty big audience over the last show, this show, and the show that the next night, which would be Death Before Dishonor 2, Night 2. And they fell well short, I believe, in all 3 shows. And I think Gabe's reasoning was something to the effect of he felt like they just were too focused at this time on getting the new website and tape distribution model up and running. Basically, that they had their eye off the ball a bit, because they were just dealing with all the fallout from finally really splitting away from Rob Feinstein. I mean, I don't know how much of that is just them saying that and how much is that real. I could see either way, but all I know is I don't think they ever went back to Milwaukee.
Yeah, it's disappointing in the sense of the previous show, the last show that we reviewed, Reborn Completion, was probably one of Gabe's greatest achievements in terms of booking, in terms of big angles, hitting and landing and everything being in place. So you'd like to see, good booking and good planning and stuff rewarded. And I guess there's a little bit of a lag time, right, between when something good happens and when you see the fruits of the labor, because eventually it was rewarded, right? The good product did lead to an increase in the audience over the next couple of years.
I think the lag time is the perfect way to put it, because I believe Gabe, years and years later, I think he told Dave Meltzer once something to the effect of his booking philosophy was anytime you push a guy, you have to wait a year to know if it really takes, because it takes a long time, at least back in the old days before pay-per-views were prevalent and stuff like that, for the tapes and the footage to make its way to enough people that people kind of see what's going on. And I have to imagine, a period like this where you and I have watched the last few shows and it feels like, oh, Ring of Honor really is in a new era and the booking is probably as good as it's ever been right now. But yet to fans, they're still probably weeks, depending on where they are, or months away from seeing these shows. And, they're getting shows more from like right at the start of all the strife, probably. So, yeah, there's this weird delay between the product you make and the reaction to it, which I don't really think exists now because everything is so immediate now.
Yeah, that's true. I mean, you still have PWG, which does not put online shows on, but they also don't really do like storylines in the same way that a standard wrestling promotion does. So they more run on like buzz and the names of the guys that are appearing more than any sort of like what's going on in the product right now.
Yeah, just brand reputations. But back here, you had to kind of like, I remember we talked a few shows back where there was a shoot interview clip from Samoa Joe where he talked about like one of his frustrations of the Briscoes feud was he felt like the crowds weren't buying into the Briscoes as serious enough. And he was like, well, if they had seen the last few shows where this feud had started, they would be buying into it. But because those shows aren't even on tape and DVD yet, we're kind of in the middle of an angle without people having even seen the start of it, which just, it's something you have to think back on this era of Ring of Honor. Like it's a problem, or not always a problem, but just like a challenge they had.
Yeah, no, I would agree. Almost like a wrestling challenge. I don't know. When I hear that word, I just think, wrestling challenge. It was everyone's favorite.
But going to the show itself, one other thing that was different about this show, and Gabe mentions it on commentary, is he said to make Death Before Dishonor weekend different this year, there's going to be no backstage segments. So everything here is in the ring, and pretty much everything is a match. And it's not a shorter show. It's still pushing right up against 3 hours, but it's basically nothing but wrestling. And Matt, I don't know about you, but I kind of miss the backstage segments.
I didn't this time. If this was like this all the time, I would probably miss them. But I thought for one show, I thought it was a nice change of pace, personally.
I do appreciate them trying to make things different. Different shows feel different. And that'll be true for the next show because that's still part of this weekend where so 2 straight shows, there's going to be no backstage segments. But we do get still in-ring segments. So we open this show in an uncommon way for this era of Ring of Honor, right in the ring, in front of the live crowd. Dave Prazak is in the ring. He's the ring announcer for this night because we're in the Midwest. The lighting, and this is something that's apparent right from the start. And Matt, every show lately, it feels like there's a different production thing. And this one, the lighting is so bright that when you're watching from the hard cam angle, you can't make out the details on people's faces. It is just blown out completely. So you cannot see Dave Prazak's facial expressions, but we can hear him. And he brings out Baron Von Raschke, local favorite, and he introduces as a legend in this area. Von Raschke gets a good round of applause from the crowd as well as chants for him. Baron welcomes everyone to Ring of Honor, and he starts going down memory lane, only to be quickly interrupted by Generation Next, who receive some boos for doing that. Alex Shelley snatches the mic away from Raschke, and he calls him the ghost of wrestling past before he introduces everyone in the stable, which he's been doing on all these shows lately. Every new market, you got to introduce them. Shelley says they've been making their names at other people's expenses lately, including at Ricky Steamboat's expense the previous week. Shelley calls Raschke decrepit, and then Baron shouts, "Do you know what that means, P-Brain?" which gets a P-Brain chant from the crowd. Shelley says they've decided to make their name at Baron's expense tonight. Baron points at each guy and he says, "Eeny, meeny, miny, or mo," he letting them choose. Before they can come to blows, though, the Second City Saints of CM Punk, Colt Cabana, and Ace Steel hit the ring. They attack Generation X, chase him out of the ring, except for Jack Evans, who gets trapped in the ring and held by Ace Steel. Punk gets on the mic at this point, and he says there's no way those guys were going to come to the Saints' old stomping grounds of Wisconsin and do this. Baron puts the claw on Jack Evans to a big pop, which is such one of those weird things that happens in wrestling, those meetings of the generations where Baron Von Raschke, at I believe age 63, put the claw on Jack Evans. And then the Baron poses with the Saints, and he says to let the new age of Ring of Honor begin. At this point, Baron leaves. Punk gets back on the mic to quickly talk about how the Saints came up in Milwaukee, and he says they're coming in as champions and leaving as champions. Matt, this was kind of something we've talked about before, I think, where Gabe usually did this almost every time they debuted in a new market, where he would do an in-ring segment to start the show that would kind of introduce some of the major stars you'd be seeing in a key match later, maybe bring in an old local favorite to say hi, and kind of a formula beginning for a new market.
It was fun. Man did Generation X look short compared to Baron von Raschke. And, it also, what it did was it gave the chance to keep the Generation X Saints feud going, even though, that they didn't have a match with each other on this night. So it served a bunch of purposes. I thought it worked just fine. And I thought Baron von Raschke was very entertaining.
Yeah, it was funny. Like, I forget if it was in the Observer or the Torch, but there was someone saying something like, they were saying it's weird to watch a guy goose stepping and getting a big pop, but like it makes sense if you know Baron von Raschke. And
this was also, like just a few weeks after JBL got in trouble for doing it in Germany, right?
Oh yeah. Well, see, he didn't make a career of it. That was his fatal error, Matt. And of course, maybe the location, maybe.
Yeah, I'm thinking that. Yeah.
But that brings us to the first match because, again, no backstage segments, so we're getting right to the action after that first segment. Four-corner survival match. Trent Acid defeated Ace Steel, Delirious, and Matt Sydal, who was escorted to the ring by Daisy Hayes. He wins in 9 minutes, 21 seconds when he pinned Delirious after hitting an inverted brainbuster. Matt, this was the start of a little mini angle on this double shot where I guess they had promoted on the website and they also mentioned on commentary that Trent Acid is the king of the multi-man match, which feels like a complete invention just for this double shot weekend, and that Trent had promised to win both of the matches. Spoiler, this weekend he wins both multi-man matches and gets kind of an ill-fated match against Samoa Joe as a result. Matt, what did you think about this first of two big multi-man matches for Trent Acid?
Yeah, I guess we'd have to go back and look at the record books to see if this has any bearing in history that Trent Acid would be the king of the multi-man matches. But I did notice that he came out, like after last week he was Backseat Boys Trent Acid, and now he's back to being all dirty and grimy again with like a random like rag in his back pocket and stuff. And he's being a heel, right? He's poking people in the eye and but he's very sloppy. Did you notice that? Like he was just like really sloppy on this show. He does an Acai moonsault onto Ace, but he pretty much misses it completely and lands in the crowd. And I feel like the match like kind of followed suit. There's a lot of sloppiness, but Sydal did look very good, and him and Delirious did their mat wrestling stuff, and even Delirious, like he went for a crossbody. Ace was supposed to catch him, but he just fell over for a 2 count. I don't know if that was intentional. I don't think it was. Sydal's really the only one that looked particularly good. There was one of the weirdest Tower of Doom spots ever. Acid tried to do a reverse Rana on Sydal, who was on Delirious's shoulders. I don't know what happened, but it did not look good. Delirious hit the Shadows over Hell on Ace, but Sydal broke it up. Then Acid took Sydal out of the ring with a Yakuza kick. Ace hit the Spinal Shock off the middle rope, but Acid stopped him from pinning. And then Sydal does a big flip dive onto Ace all of a sudden. And then Acid hits the inverted brainbuster on Delirious for the pin. It wasn't unentertaining, but honestly, probably the most entertaining part was when Gabe was talking about Delirious' lizard face, and Mil Mascaras said that Mascaras always wore his mask everywhere, and Gabe said, yeah, but he just had the face of a Mexican. And even Nolte was, taken aback by how, over the top that statement was, and I did not expect it coming from Gabe. I remember one time Punk said something like that about the SAT, and Gabe was like, what are you talking about? Why would you say that? And now what is Gabe trying to be Punk? I don't even know. But yeah, that's my take on the match. Not unentertaining, extremely sloppy.
I thought this was an average match, and I completely agree, where I felt like it was really sloppy. In fact, it was kind of surprising, although maybe knowing how their careers turned out, it shouldn't be. But the two veterans in this match were the sloppy guys. It was, Acid and Steel, and the two younger guys who were still breaking in, like Sydal especially, were the guys who looked better, especially when they were working each other, although they were doing, those kind of fast, overly rehearsed looking scrambly sequences that you get a lot of times from two guys that wrestle each other all over the country. But with scrambles, or these kind of multi-man spot fests, they are the match more than any other where I'll forgive some sloppiness sometimes if they're just going for big, exciting moves. And this was one of those four-ways where some four-ways in multi-mans, they try and just do slow, like pair-off wrestling for a few minutes before they get to the crazy spots. And I kind of like a match like this where after the first minute, they're just like, we're going to cut out the opening part of these matches. We know what you want to see. And the last 8 minutes of like a 9-minute match were just them going crazy. And again, lots of it, like you said, was sloppy, but I think the ambition made it entertaining. And yeah, Matt Sydal, just one of the most fluid, graceful high flyers. That dive he does over the top that you talked about, he does like a rotation right at the end, but it's always in such a smooth motion. Like it starts and ends exactly when it's supposed to. And it always feels like there's so many guys, they do really cool high flying moves, but it feels like they're either ending it way quick just to be safe, or they're barely pulling it off and they almost break their neck. And even from this age, like Matt Sydal, it always feels like it ends exactly how it was supposed to. And like, he makes it look easy, even though it's not easy at all, I am sure. But yeah, sloppy to be this, very sloppy, especially one other spot you didn't mention. I don't even know how to describe this, but Trent Acid throws one of the slowest, worst looking punches or clotheslines I've ever seen, to the point where, Matt, I can't tell if he was trying to throw a punch or a clothesline. It was like a halfway, really slow, really ugly looking. And yeah, it's one of those things sometimes you see guys where you go, why didn't they do better in a company? And we can see here, Trent Acid's getting a little bit of a mini push, and
yeah,
this was far from his best performance.
He's like falling apart. Like the last match was also sloppy, and yeah, it's weird timing for him to get a push because he's clearly like doing worse than he had at any point previously. I don't want to speculate on why. I mean, there's a lot of things that have been said about Trent Acid, so I'm not saying anything. But like, Clearly, what we see is his performance, and that's the only thing we can say for sure. And it's definitely below what it had been in pretty much all of 2003.
Yeah, because when you think about stuff like the 2 Homicide matches in 2003, those aren't perfect matches, but night and day difference from this. Next up, we'll go to a match that we actually is not on the DVD, but just for history's sake, I should note there was one match that did not make the DVD. I'm assuming for time reasons, and that was the Great Kazushi defeated Sean Daivari in 6 minutes 41 seconds. I have to assume this was just for time reasons. The Great Kazushi worked both nights of this double shot. He was Kazushi Miyamoto from All Japan Wrestling. He was kind of between stints there, I believe, at this time. And I think his match is on the next DVD. I'm not sure. I think that one makes tape, but yeah, I have to imagine that it's no big loss that we did not see the Great Kazushi versus Sean Daivari. The second match on the show, or third match, I guess, the second we're seeing, would be the Ring of Honor Pure title match, which is an immediate rematch from the last show. Doug Williams successfully defends the title, defeating Alex Shelley again via pinfall in 16 minutes, 47 seconds with the Chaos Theory suplex. Matt, I would describe this match as a good match that I think would probably be better if I hadn't just watched their previous match on the last show, because I felt like in a lot of ways this was very similar to their last match, and it was kind of I would rank this as a good match, but it's an inferior version, in my opinion, of the match we had just seen them wrestle. It's kind of the same structure where they're doing kind of a lot of mat work at the start that doesn't really go anywhere, and then about halfway through they start more trading just moves and focus less on the submissions. Alex Shelley's working over the neck of Doug Williams, just like them last match, even to the point where he's doing a lot of the cool key spots he did in that match. He's doing here again, like the double stomp from the top rope to the back of Williams' head, the 10 where he just does 10 over and over knee drops to his back of his head. He's just lifting spots directly. Williams does the spot again to Shelley where he ties up in knots and he can't get out. And nothing in the match is bad. It's just, I kept thinking there's not much in this match I could point to and say it's different or even as good or better than their first match. And the other thing I would say, the one thing that is different is in this match, unlike the first one they had, both guys use all 3 rope breaks each, But even that, it doesn't really go much of anywhere. After these, all three rope breaks each, Shelley gets Williams in a submission, but Williams quickly gets out of it. And it does play into the end, but in a weird way where at the very end, Shelley is down two. He still has one rope break left. And Doug Williams goes to hit his Chaos Theory German suplex, which is his finisher, where he kind of grabs the guy in the waistlock and pushes him into the turnbuckle and then springs back out and does like a rolling German suplex on him. And Shelley grabs the rope and uses his third rope break. So you feel like, okay, this is telling a story. But then all that happens is Williams immediately goes for it to get the Chaos Theory suplex again. This time he kind of just yanks Shelley off the rope so he's not gripping anymore. Shelley then rolls through, he survives, he doesn't get hit with it. And then Williams just hits him tries the third time wins. So it was kind of this weird thing where it was like, okay, the third rope break technically is part of the story of the match, but it didn't really feel like the rope breaks, the loss of rope breaks was what was stopping Shelley from not losing this match. But still, in my opinion, good match. It's just, if you've seen the last match they had, you don't need to see this one.
I definitely like this a lot more than you. I thought it was of a similar quality to the first match. I didn't think it was exactly the same, but more than anything, I just love these two guys. Like, I just think their work is so good. I love Doug Williams. I love that they were able to get the crowd into this thing where they were, like, exchanging nerve holds. Like, how often do you see that? Where, like, someone does a nerve hold and the crowd is into it, never mind the two guys are, like, going back and forth with them. So I really love that. There were some things that I thought were interesting. Like, early in the match, Shelley got the Border City stretch, but the announcers and the crowd barely reacted, and it seemed like Gabe didn't even realize it was the Border City stretch, because Gabe, like, right after that was like, he likes to set up for that Border City stretch while Doug was in the Border City stretch. Like, I mean, did you notice that? Because I thought that was very strange.
And it was especially weird because this, just to mention for a second, you mentioned the crowd. I thought this crowd, for this match, they were like a really cool crowd. Like, they were doing like very respectful, but you could tell they were into it applause after basically every submission. It was like a very different kind of crowd reaction. Yeah.
And one thing I would notice is like Shelley wasn't really being a heel here, like at all. Like he didn't have Generation X with him. Like he was really taking the match seriously. I still think that he should have been the champion during this time. I still don't really. It's like, even if like he lost just have him win it here even. Like, I feel like it would have done something for him, and I don't really see this doing much for Doug Williams. Again, I guess we mentioned at the last show, like maybe it's just to add some credibility because Doug Williams was very credible. I don't know, but I still think that Shelley would have benefited more. But I like that when Williams did like a big comeback, he did his his British like Dodger sequence where he went through the legs and stuff. I think that's like, for a big babyface comeback, you don't usually see it done with chain wrestling, and I enjoyed that very much. But yeah, I mean, what you said is all true. I just liked it more. You know what I mean? Like I just think that this really tickles me. Yeah, I guess I'm still stuck in 2004, but I enjoyed it very much.
Yeah, I think again, it wasn't even. If I had just I like this match, but I feel like if I had watched this a year from the show we had just watched, I probably would have be closer to your enthusiasm. But I just kept, and maybe that's my fault. I just kept comparing it to the last match these two had, which I really liked quite a bit, and I thought this one wasn't quite as good. But Matt, I think the one thing we can agree on is Mark Nolte's Gordon Soley impression is frighteningly bad. He unveils it here, and it is not good.
Oh yeah, I did make mention of that. I also just, why did he do it? I don't understand. What was he going for here?
So yeah, that's that match. After the match, Williams asks for a handshake. Shelley teases giving one, but instead he just dashes past him. So even though he wasn't healing it up really strongly in the match, like you said, still has to remind us at the end he's a heel. And that brings us to the next match. Low-Key's return match, although it's weird calling this a return match because he did technically actually wrestle one other match earlier in 2004, that four-way where Joe, BJ Whitmer, Dan Moff, and him, where they added him at the last second because they wanted to try and increase ticket sales. But we get his first match back on this run in Ring of Honor. The Rottweilers of Low Key and Rocky Romero, with Julia Smokes in their corner, defeated BJ Whitmer and Dan Moff via submission in 1656 when Romero made Moff tap out to a cross arm breaker. Matt, before I throw it to you, I'll just say before the match starts, Allison Danger enters the ring right after Moff and Whitmer do, and she gets on the mic to give them one last chance to keep the prophecy together. Moff tells her to fuck you, and he tells her to get her ass out of there. She obliges, but not before saying that they'll be sorry. Turns out on this night, we'll talk to her about it a little bit. She was the one, unfortunately, that was sorry. Matt, what did you think? You know, there's a lot of history between Low Key and Moff, especially here.
Yeah, I liked how hard-hitting the match was. It did feel a little bit directionless at times. I thought it was good at the end, but one thing that I found strange was, like, Low-key, this was his first match back as, like, in a new role, and it was just like a match, like just a mid-card match. I thought that was kind of strange. Like, he just felt like a guy immediately, but maybe in some ways that's good. Like, let him just be part of the mix, bring him down a peg or two, but it still felt weird to me. That said, the crowd was pretty hungry for Moff vs. Low-key. They were excited to see it, and they were trading hard chops and stuff and like kicks and what you want to see from them. I just thought that the match kind of went in kind of just like a little bit meandering directions. The one thing I would say, it was cool seeing like Low-key for the first time be a heel, doing low blows and stuff like that, but mostly he was doing his stiff chops. It's funny, Mark Nolte says that Harley Race thinks Whitmer is one of the brightest up-and-coming stars in wrestling, and Gabe agrees. And, like, I don't know how many people thought that at the time. I guess a bunch of indie promoters did. Whitmer had a good indie career. He never, I don't think, became a big star. Would you say his peak was sort of 2006, 2007 with the CZW and then Jimmy Jacobs feud? That was probably, like, the peak of BJ Whitmer.
Yeah, I would say Jimmy Jacobs feud in my mind. I mean, I would need to rewatch those, but if you just ask me off the top of my head, what I feel like was probably when he was most popular, I would probably say Jimmy Jacobs, the tag and then feud.
And the CZW feud, for sure, he was a big part of that.
Yeah.
There was also a moment they were talking about Allison Danger where Nolte says, the only thing harder than getting a woman is getting her to leave sometimes. So I'm just thinking, like, noted ladies man Mark Nolte. He just can't get the women off of him. It was just funny to me, like, imagining that. Like, oh man, the women, they just can't get enough of Mark Nolte. But like the other Rottweilers, Moff, he poked Key in the eye too, so he's showing that he's not a total babyface either, but Rottweilers were basically taking turn kicking Moff's shoulders on the floor. And then when they take over, Key does his first ever big double stomp, because that's going to be his new big move, and this is the first time I remember him doing it. Did he ever do any double stomps in ROH before this?
I'm not sure, but this one, I mean, it looks especially painful, this one.
Onto his arm, actually, onto Moff's arm. They're barely tagging, like, at all, like the Rottweilers. They just come in and out. Oh, I wrote down this other funny line. Gabe goes, Julius Smokes used to be such a cool guy. I cracked up at that. I felt so bad. Like, oh, Gabe, you miss your old buddy Julius, who you looked up to.
There's a few times on these shows since Homicide really went like deep into the heel where Gabe has tried to act like Julius Smokes has dramatically changed. And it's like, I don't know if I'm buying that, Gabe.
Yeah, well,
he seems like the same guy.
It's kind of true with Homicide too, other than his promos.
Yeah,
but just like he's such a cool guy. It reminded me of the episode of Seinfeld where George liked Elaine's boyfriend Tony. And he was making him sandwiches so they could go rock climbing, and he's like, he's such a cool guy. There was a cool spot where Moff German suplexed both Rottweilers at the same time. I definitely enjoyed that. Like, and it wasn't like they were like kind of like a sandwich. It was like side by side, like each of them with one arm. I thought that was cool. Smokes distract the ref, so he misses the big tag to Whitmer. So Whitmer attacks Smokes, and then Moff speared him. And Nolte was criticizing Hansen for not allowing the blind tag when he allowed the Rottweilers. Man, it seems very common already for people to be criticizing Hansen a lot on commentary. When Whitmer gets the hot tag, he exploders Low-key into Rocky, and Homicide then came to ringside. And Low-key did his, like, the Kobashi chops on Whitmer, and Whitmer then exploded him again. Loki blocked the wrist clutch and got the dragon clutch, and Moff speared him. Romero got the armbar on Moff, and Whitmer is blocked by Loki, and Moff taps. I like the hard-hittingness. I like the ending. I thought that there was a little bit of time where it kind of just felt like they were just doing stuff. And I thought it was weird that Loki was just a guy. So that's my general feeling. But it was a good match. I thought it was a good match.
Yeah, I thought this was a solidly entertaining match, like a good, I would say good again, but it's weird. I think kind of going to your point, the way I would put it is, I think this is one of the first times we've seen in Ring of Honor Low-key in a match where he's not shooting for the moon and trying to steal the show. No one in this match, I think, is trying to really have match of the night. They're just trying to be a good middle of the road undercard match. And it's kind of weird not seeing especially when Low-key in the first 6 months of Ring of Honor, that company was built around the idea of, Gabe would say on commentary, Low-key with one show stealing match after the other. And yeah, it's weird to see Low-key just being kind of part of the mid card here. And even he's doing the healing here. And I thought it was kind of cool where the crowd, they were really excited to see Low-key when he first came out. He's back in Ring of Honor, and they were just excited to see him. But when he cheated, the crowd did boo him, which I thought was cool because a lot of crowds probably wouldn't have. But it is funny. There was a weird moment early on where, Key's doing a little bit of cheating, like you said. But there's a moment early on where he's wrestling Dan Moff, or Dan Moff gets in the ring, and Low-key kind of cowers. He lets Moff completely dominate him, and he kind of cowers and then tags out. He just falls to his butt and runs over and tags Romero. And again, it's so weird to see Low-key kind of change on a dime, because obviously that would be the last thing Low-key would have done as a face in Ring of Honor. He would have never backed down. But yeah, if you like hard hitting, this is, four guys that hit real hard, and there isn't, like you said, there isn't much of a story. I would say the second half of the match, there is a story where Moff hurts his shoulder on the outside, and they work it over. The double German suplex spot he does near the end, where he suplexes one guy per arm, that is really cool. I agree, but I did feel not to be too much of a nerd, but they work over his arm for the second half of the match, and then he suplexes a guy with the arm and only the arm, and I was but yeah, this felt kind of like a house show match where, usually in Ring of Honor, you're used to guys just going to try and steal the show wherever they are up and down the card. But this felt kind of like what it was, which was the first half of a double shot, so the B show, and it's a mid-card match, and no one here is doing everything they can. I could very easily imagine if you told these guys, okay, you're in the main event and we're giving you 25 minutes and we want you to just steal the show, or I guess you're not stealing the show if you're in the main event, but I think these four could have had a much better match than they gave here, and I don't think they were trying to have that match here.
Which is fine sometimes.
Yeah, it's still a good, a decent match. Like you said, it dragged a couple times in spots, but overall it was a good match, but something you'll forget immediately afterwards. Yeah, the only other thing I guess to say is I felt bad for BJ Whitmer, where he's coming to the ring and Moff is getting cheered, or Moff is slapping hands, and so I wrote when I was watching this, I wrote, so I guess they're baby faces now. And then right after I wrote that, a few fans in the crowd start chanting "Wash your face" at BJ Whitmer, and he just flips them off, and I felt bad for him in that, because for those who don't. For some reason, I don't know. I have to assume that everyone that is listening to this podcast knows who BJ Whitmer is, but he has some fairly deep acne scars on his face. So that is a chant he would get on the indies from time to time. But I believe this is one of the first times I've heard someone in a Ring of Honor crowd send it towards him. But so
at least he has that Harley Race endorsement.
Yeah, that'll get him to sleep at night. After the match, Allison Danger returns to the ring and tells the Rottweilers that they did phenomenal tonight. Danger says if they keep working like that, maybe one day they can join the Prophecy. So they're continuing this idea that Allison Danger's kind of insane now, and she keeps thinking the Prophecy is still alive. Danger starts to call out Moth and Whitmer. She starts to call them losers, but then Moth pie faces Danger right into the Rottweilers, and Homicide gives her the cop killer to a big pop. So that continues. Ring of Honor, I wrote Ring of Honor, where the heel group gets a giant face pop for killing a woman. All of the Rottweilers celebrate with Romero standing on Danger, Homicide calling her a bitch, and Smokes pantomiming jacking off onto her. I should note the crowd loves all of this. And then after this, Key, Romero, and Smokes post on the turnbuckles to cheers like their faces, which seems kind of weird. While Homicide goes to the outside, he throws chairs in the ring. And then we cut to intermission, where we get to see Danger being attended to by referees. They put a neck brace on her, and they carry her out what looks like on a giant, thick wooden plank, or maybe a door. I don't know.
It was a door. It was a door. It kind of I'm pretty sure that's what they did for Daniels too. It sort of mirrored the Daniels thing from the end of A Battle Lines Are Drawn. Did you notice the parallels there and the way they shot it?
Yeah.
I think it was intentional.
Yeah, now that I think about it. If it's intentional, that's a neat little detail because, it was, in that sense, very similar to how they wrote out Daniels.
Yeah, and it's when I watched the spot, it was like, man, if it was, I mean, obviously it's bad to do the violence against women angles, no matter what, I think. But if it wasn't for the crowd, cheering it on, it would at least be a little bit less heinous because, like, the announcers, for once, actually did treat this as a horrible thing to be sad and upset about, and they acted very concerned about Allison Danger's well-being for the rest of the show, which is absolutely not something that they have done for any other attack on any other women, including Becky Bayless getting pile-driven through a table on the floor by the Carnage crew and different things like that. This is, I guess, a very, very baby step in the right direction from, like, the worst place possible. So they're still in the second worst place possible, but at least they're treating it like it's bad now. The crowd has not caught up yet.
Yeah, it feels like the announcer's stance on violence against women is solely dependent on if they're aligned with a face or a heel. Like, if they're aligned with a heel, it's perfectly fine for a man to beat the living crap out of a woman. If they're aligned with a face, then it's the worst thing ever. So they don't really have a strict moral stance.
But Danger's a heel.
Yeah, I guess, actually. Oh, you see, that's another weird thing, which is she's a heel, but the Rottweilers took her out, and they're heels. Like, and then they pose like it was like a baby face move, and they get huge cheers. Like, it's just confusing. I don't know, Matt. I will read from this live report that was in pwinsider.com at this time. A guy named Jim Fields wrote in a live report, and I just thought he gave a little bit of live color to the segment. He wrote, "They spent a majority of intermission getting Allison Danger out of the ring. They ended up stretchering her out on an 8-foot wood table. Strange that since they were planning the angle that they didn't have a stretcher available." But I'll just interject on Jim Fields' notes, which is maybe, again, going to your point, Matt, that maybe they planned the symbolism. Anyway, Jim Fields continues, "But I guess in some way it made it seem more real." This is the part, Matt, why I'm reading this. Jim Fields writes, "However, with both Ricky Steamboat and Baron von Raschke signing autographs, the fans could have cared less." And the mental image in my mind of, like, them trying to do this serious stretcher angle, and then everyone just focused on, like, Ricky Steamboat signing autographs in, like, the building at the same time. Like, that makes me feel bad.
That's not great planning.
And Jim Fields also adds, "About Steamboat, too, the crowd was, as you'd expect, really into him. He also took the time to make sure to sign for everyone who wanted him to, even signing a huge stack of photos that one fan brought." And I've never been an autograph person, but I just wanted to use this as a chance to say to people, folks, don't be that guy. If you're getting an autograph signed somewhere, don't be the guy that brings, like, 20 things to get signed. Like, from friends who enjoy getting autographs, no one likes being behind the guy in line that has like a stack of things that they will probably sell on eBay. It's nice that Steamboat signed them all, but just bring one or two things. Don't bring 20 different things for Steamboat to sign.
That is your public service announcement for today. Also, wash your hands.
Yes, I was going to say the most important thing we need right now is advice to autograph seekers, because obviously that's something that's going to be happening quite a bit for the next few months. There's lots of public gatherings where people are.
No, the only, in the New York City, which is where I live, which is like the epicenter of the virus right now, the only public gatherings that are allowed right now are autograph signings and wrestler conventions. I don't know why. It's strange.
Vince McMahon just is insisting. He's really, I was going to say greasing the hand, or for a second I wanted to say greasing the pocket, but Matt,
you can grease the hand as long as you wash it immediately afterward.
I mean, I'm going to be out Purell pretty soon, so I might be down to grease soon, Matt. But going on to something that I could not think of a transition from greased hands to. Chad Collyer defeated Danny Daniels in 8 minutes, 28 seconds when he made him submit to the Texas Cloverleaf. I am going to find it a struggle to say much about this match. I thought this was the most average of the average. It didn't really have a story. It wasn't bad. It wasn't good. I felt it just filled time. I will say Chad Collyer is a guy who I think is a little underrated, who I would have liked to have seen him work full time in Ring of Honor at this period. And this was kind of like a bad match for him, because even though he did kind of show off his versatility, because he did more of a standard kind of indie match where it wasn't as much focused on his mat work and submissions, and he even breaks out the really nice tope. There was also a couple, I would think, kind of rarer for him botches where he did kind of a pretty ugly leg lariat that the announcers called out, and then he did a Hurricane Rana where he did not jump high enough for it, and it basically turned into more of a Hurricane Rana at the armpits.
And the crowd chanted, "That's okay, that's okay." So they're a nice crowd.
That was very hard, and that was one of the early instances where I think we've talked about this before, where I feel like crowds have changed, and you've rightfully pointed out that maybe not every crowd, depending on the region, is forgiving in 2020. But I feel like this was around 2003, 2004 was when I first started hearing like any crowd started to do stuff like the "That's okay" chant.
Yeah. This was an early time. Also, in the show a few shows ago in Chicago, where the guy chanted like after a racist chant, they were like, "You are racist." So we're getting some more woke crowds already in this era, but slightly more woke.
And I don't know if that's just a good sign of society, or if that was maybe the ECW influence on fans starting to finally wear off after a few years of them being out. But definitely, like if this same spot happened a few years earlier, you would have gotten nothing. You would have gotten no "That's okay." You would have
right. You also, but on the other hand, you did get major homicide chants during the Homicide match. So
and the crowd absolutely eating up like a woman getting totally destroyed by a group of men. So,
oh yeah, that.
Yeah. So yeah, they had one good moment in the midst of a maybe troubling performance from the crowd. Mixed review for the crowd tonight. Yeah, Matt, I don't know. Do you have any thoughts on an 8-minute Chad Collyer Danny Daniels match?
Actually, this is another match that I liked more than you. I expected nothing from this. I expected it to maybe be 4 minutes. But they tried. They actually gave him 8 minutes. 8 minutes is enough to do a thing. And I didn't think it was like a good match, because I don't think it could be, but I thought it was a solid match for the time they had, especially given Collier's botches. Daniels worked pretty hard, and they kept mentioning that Daniels was doing better in the wrestling match than he had been in those brawls that he had been in, or that one brawl, I guess, with the Carnage Crew. And I agree with that. He did look a lot better here. There's not really too much to say. I really enjoyed Collyer. It's a shame that he made those botches, but I thought it was decent. I thought just they were working hard. And they did what they could in that amount of time. So I would give this match a solid 2.25, 2.5 stars, which is, for that match of that length is not bad. I expected it to, not even get to the 2-star level, because it just wouldn't be long enough. A lot of times these matches that are unhyped after intermission with guys that aren't pushed don't get even this much time. And so I thought it was nice that they gave him this much time, and it was okay.
Yeah, I do agree about the time, because a lot of these matches, it feels like in the year or two before this would be the slot on the card where they would give a guy 4 minutes. Even though it seems like not that much, for some reason I find that the difference between 4 minutes and 8 minutes is all the difference in the world
Oh
sometimes
yeah,
for wrestling.
it's huge. Like I would say, once you get 7 minutes, you could have an actual match, not like a classic or anything, but a match. Whereas you do 4 minutes, unless you're like doing like an incredible mega sprint that's just action packed, you're not really gonna have like a match that can really be rated much. You know what I mean?
Yeah, and I believe we've talked in the past about how it's hard to really get a good handle on a wrestler if you're trying to scout them and you're giving them 4 minutes. But with 8 here, I think you do get enough to at least learn some things about the guy you just booked for a show. But that brings us to our next match, which is Jimmy Jacobs, John Walters, and Matt Striker with Ricky Steamboat in their corner, defeating Generation Next of Austin Aries, Jack Evans, and Roderick Strong in 16 minutes, 47 seconds when Walters made Evans tap to some kind of weird submission I can't describe. Matt, before I give it to you, before the match starts, John Walters gets on the mic in the ring and he says, if there's one thing Matt Striker, and Jimmy Jacobs understand, it's that there's power in numbers, which it's just John Walters just comes off as such a goober. I'm sorry.
It's weird. It's weird how often they decide to give him mic time, isn't it? I guess it says a lot about how bad Stryker and maybe even Jacobs at the time was on the mic. Or maybe Jacobs' character just didn't talk. Maybe that was
he would have to just say "Huss," which might have been an improvement on Walters. But Walters introduces Ricky Steamboat as their insurance policy against Generation Next. Steamboat gets into a standoff with Generation Next for a while, but he eventually drops down to ringside, but not before the crowd chants arm drag, which I thought was funny. And then Steamboat, he serves Jack Evans. Jack Evans, does the breakdance stuff. And then Steamboat decides he's going to show off his dancing, which I can't do this justice. Basically, Ricky Steamboat's idea of breakdancing is to shrug his shoulders up and down. And that got a big pop from the crowd. Matt, what did you think, though, about the match? And if you want, what did you think about Ricky Steamboat's shoulder shrugging?
The shoulder shrugging, I thought was 5 stars. Best shoulder shrugging I've ever seen. No, I actually I love this match. I'm not saying it was a great match, but I thought Generation Next looked so good here, especially when they were working over Jacobs. Evans, you've mentioned before how that guy is just like always on and just like he works the crowd at every moment. And I thought this was really true here. And his wrestling looked really good. He was doing stuff. I will say this: at the beginning, he did some arm drags on Jacobs, and Multi called them beautiful arm drags. They were not beautiful arm drags, and Jacobs did arm drags right after that were much better. But for the rest of it, I thought it was really good. I thought that they were working over Jacobs mostly, and Evans was doing the mat work. Aries did one of the most brutal inverted atomic drops I've ever seen in my life on Jacobs, to the point where Nolte called it a spine buster, but it was an atomic drop. But Evans did a drop saw, landed on his feet, followed up by a corkscrew splash off the mat, and then worked the crowd the whole time. Strong did a great top rope elbow onto Jacobs. He did a press slamming Jacobs into the turnbuckle really hard. They did this triple team double stomp on Jacobs, where Evans came off the top onto Jacobs' midsection while Aries and Strong were holding him up. Strong did this brutal running knee to Jimmy's back, which sent him crashing into the buckle. The period where they were working over Jacobs they were just so impressive. They were just really coming together, in my opinion. Jacobs finally press slammed Evan off the top onto Aries and Strong and did a double hot tag to Stryker and Walters. And then they were doing double team moves. Stryker and Walters were, including an electric chair lung blower, which got a really big pop. Aries did the 450 on Stryker, but Jacobs hit him with a senton to break it up. That's when Shelley interfered, so Steamboat attacked him. Evans missed the 630 on Walters, and Walters did that crazy submission for the tap out. I thought, basically, I thought that the early part of the match where Generation Next was working over Jacobs was excellent. They just looked really good. And then when they finally did the hot tag, it was so fast-paced that I thought that was very good. Some negatives, I guess, were Steamboat. He kept distracting the ref, helping Generation Next, which made him seem a little bit dumb. But I don't know. I just thought Generation Next looked so good here, and I was very impressed with them.
Yeah, something I've really found on rewatching these shows, something I've been talking about, I think, on some of these episodes, is that Generation Next, a lot of these, I keep saying with these tags, like they're not as good as I remember. And this was the first tag where I was like, this is as good, if not better, than I remember. Like I really, really like this match. And I agree with you. Like I wouldn't quite put as like great, but this is like, if I had to give it a star rating, like 3 3/4 or something like that. The way I would describe the quality of this match was, it's not the kind of thing like you'll go, oh, I'm going to remember this match forever. But if you bought like a compilation tape of Generation Next or Ring of Honor in 2004, and this match was on the tape, you'd watch and go, oh, like I didn't remember this match. I'm really glad this was on the tape. Like that's a cool little hidden gem.
Yeah, the definition of a hidden gem is this match. Yeah.
Yeah. And I feel like Generation X, like you said, this match until the end where they lose, it's kind of just a showcase for Generation X. Like it really, some of these other matches they were in, it felt like they weren't as in control as a new stable should be. And this match, it's all about, everyone on that team looks great. They have those cool triple teams you talked about. I think this is one of the first really, really good Roderick Strong performances where he just looks like a monster. Like you said, just almost lawn darting Jacobs into the corner and just hitting hard. And like all three guys look really good. They almost had a bit of like a Kai and Tai dojo kind of feel of just like this heel group with like really cool triple teams, and they're just all really fast-paced, exciting guys. So even though they're the heels, you're just like, wow, these guys are just so cool. And yeah, just a really, really fun kind of showcase. My flaw in this match would be, I feel like going to the end, like you said, where Generation Next dominates, and then at the end, there's finally the hot tag, and Walters and Stryker have kind of a surprisingly entertaining kind of hot tag sequence, but the match ends very shortly after that. I could have actually stood to see if they could have kept it going at that pace and that entertainment level for a couple more minutes. I could have stood to see this match go even longer. And then at the very end, it felt like there was almost too much going on for the cameras to keep track of, because you have like Alex Shelley, who was at ringside, getting into it with Steamboat and Steamboat taking him out. And at the same time, the finish of the match is happening where Jack Evans is going for the 630, and the camera, I don't know if something went wrong or the camera angle was just bad, but like, I think John Walters rolled out of the way, but the camera angle is in so tight and the cut is so quick to it, you don't see really John Walters roll out of the way, and it just looks like Jack Evans crashes and burns on a 630, and Walters immediately puts him in the submission, which is like a weird ending. But I think he did roll out of the way. I just couldn't really tell well. And again, there's just so much going on in that last 30 seconds or a minute. I feel like it just got a little too chaotic. There was also one botch in this match where it looked like it could have been really scary, where Austin Aries takes a Matt Striker arm drag, speaking of arm drags, and he doesn't I don't know if he rotates enough or one of the guys slipped or something, but Aries almost lands right on his head. Like he doesn't rotate enough on an arm drag, which looked scary. One other thing is, Matt, I don't know what you think about Mark Nolte's commentary, but this show, he kind of grated on me. I felt like when on the first show Mark Nolte went on, I felt like, you know what, he's not great, but he's not terrible either. And I felt like, he's better than some of the commentators we've heard in early Ring of Honor. But I feel like he hasn't progressed. Like, if anything, he's regressed a little. I find him like he's a little bit worse now than he was when he started. I think he makes a mistake frequently on these shows where he will point out things that the announcer shouldn't be pointing out. Like, there will be flaws in the matches, and he'll point them out, and like things that the announcer shouldn't call attention to. Like, and he'll make rookie mistakes too. Like in this match, he says something like he's like, not Gabe, obviously Gabe's not using, he's Jimmy Bauer on this, but he's like, Jimmy, it's weird don't you find it weird that Alex Shelley didn't come out to second Generation Next? And Gabe has to point out, like, no, he's at ringside right now. Like, we can see him. And he is. And it's like little things like that where he was making those mistakes in the first couple of shows. And I thought, well, he's still learning the product. But he hasn't really slowed. Like, he still makes a couple of those gaffes, it seems like, every show. Again, he's not terrible, but I just feel like he's not getting better.
I think he adds certain things. Like, I think when he, like, talking about strategy, like, I think he can sometimes do a good job with that. Like, I don't know if you agree, like, especially for, like, a big main event match where he, like, will talk about, like, the different strengths and weaknesses and the different possible strategies. Like, I thought he added stuff to those Joe Punk matches where he's talking about, like, the rope-a-dope and things like that. And then mentioning, oh, maybe they're doing the same strategy here with, the Briscoes in the main event. Like, I like that stuff. I do agree that he points out wrestler mistakes too often. I don't know what, like, that was another thing that, like, Gorilla Monsoon and Jesse Ventura used to do also, which, and I love them, but, like, I don't know, I don't get the point of that, like, why they're, like, criticizing wrestlers. Like, that's one thing that Jim Ross, like, at his best, like, definitely never did. Um, and the great Michael Cole never does that. No, I'm just kidding. Although Michael Cole, he's definitely been good in his way sometimes. But no, seriously, like, I don't understand the desire to do that. I guess there's just a desire to sound like a great strategist, so you point out good strategy and when it's not being done. But I don't know if Nolte's the guy to be doing that. Punk would do it too sometimes.
I think some announcers, like, I can't get into their heads and read their motivations, but I know some people accuse, like, I know Dave Meltzer in the past has talked about Gorilla Monsoon would complain about certain things, like this wrestler didn't hook the leg or something, and Dave Meltzer, I remember reading him right, like, a long time ago, he resented Gorilla Monsoon doing that because some of the things he would complain about, he would be like, they're not doing those things because Vince McMahon told all the wrestlers not to do certain things, and, like, Gorilla Monsoon knows that, so he's just saying that, in Dave's mind, that meant Monsoon is just saying that basically to look smart, but really you're kind of unfairly making the wrestlers look bad when knowing they have no control over whatever flaw you're pointing out. But I think it's more just, in some guys' cases, like maybe Nolte's, it's also just about you're trying to call wrestling as if it's a shoot, and you can't, because wrestling, you're supposed to call the action, but it's a weird thing where you're also you're a promoter basically too. You're trying to hype these guys up and hype the matches up and hide flaws and explain away mistakes
and tell a story, right? Like, you're trying to get characters from point A to point B.
Like, you're trying to put a narrative on top of the match, and in regular sports or news, we would say that's bad. We would say you're supposed to just, report what you see and don't try and superimpose, like, your own preconceived notions, where pro wrestling announces the exact opposite. You very much want to do that when you can. And I think, like you said, Jim Ross at his prime, he was great at that. He would clearly have, like, a story in his head going into a match, and everything would, like, that he watched, he'd find a way to tie it back into that point or story that he went in going, like, this is what the match is about.
Exactly.
But I guess just to sum up again, really good match. And also I just want to point out Jimmy Jacobs is such a good, like, face in peril. He is so over with the Huss gimmick, and just because he's so small and he's willing to take an absolute beating, like, he's a good face in peril, where I felt kind of bad for him at a couple of times in this match, some of the offense he's taking, and it just to show you the difference, like, he could make. Like, the match is good when Matt Striker isn't the face in peril, but when he tags out and then Jimmy Jacobs becomes the face in peril, like, shortly afterwards, that's when I found, like, the match went up, like, a whole nother gear. And it's just, it's just two guys both taking a beatings, but there's just something about small, little, lovable Jimmy Jacobs getting the crap beat out of him that's just makes the match better.
It's surprising to me that Gabe went so all in with Shelley, but Jacobs still only appears, like, kind of sporadically. That will change, obviously, in the not too distant future, but Gabe took a little while to get Jacobs, like, as a full-time member of the roster.
You get the feeling with the commentary that he didn't love the Huss gimmick. Like, all the times he would joke with Nolte, like, the real, what do you think, Bruiser Brody? He kept bringing that up over and over again, so many shows. Like, I kind of, maybe I'm reading too much into this, but I kind of get the feeling that it's one of those things where Gabe recognized it was over, but he probably was not a huge fan of that gimmick himself.
Makes sense. I mean, once he started pushing Jacobs for real, he kind of got rid of the Huss gimmick too.
Yeah, and I mean, it is a one-note comedy gimmick, but it was always, pretty much on every one of these shows, it's really over. And in fact, like it's over enough to the point where after this match is over and the faces are celebrating with Steamboat, Ricky, like the whole end little thing of this segment is Ricky like doing huss hands with Jimmy. Like he's
That's
the
right, yeah.
at the end.
Everyone else loved it. Gabe didn't really like it so much.
Yeah. And that brings us to the semi-main event, the Ring of Honor World Title match, the end of this feud for now. Samoa Joe successfully defended the title when he defeated Homicide, who had Julius Smokes and Low Ki and Rocky Romero at ringside initially, at least. Joe wins in 24 minutes, 1 second, when he made Homicide pass out in the rear naked choke. This is I thought this was kind of a different match for these two. I thought it was interesting the way they took it. And where I said the Shelley and Williams match I liked a little less because I just saw their last match, I think I like this match a little more because I knew the context of all their other matches, because this one's a little different in the sense that it feels like this match, even though you would think, okay, the whole stip going into this match is Homicide. They have said, these two have wrestled so much that Gabe tells us on commentary, this is Homicide's last chance against Joe, that if Homicide loses this, he doesn't get another title shot as long as Joe is champion. And so you think, okay, it's going to be like this epic, like, they're going to try and top everything they've done before. And really, I found, other than like the final minute, which we can get into, this was like surprisingly restrained. Like, it's way more about Homicide just being like a really old school heel that is about like trying to top everything they've ever done. The match kind of falls into this really, I would say, like satisfying groove where most of the matches, Joe really dominates Homicide for a minute or two, where you really feel like Joe's clearly better than this guy now. And then Homicide does some kind of cheating, like an eye gouge or something, to get the advantage. Homicide controls a little bit, and then Joe fights back. And it kind of goes that way for most of the match. And then in the final minute, that's where it's a really exciting final minute, but it's kind of a weird final minute because the rest of the match doesn't feel like like they're trying to top everything else. But in that final minute of the match, I believe Homicide becomes the first person that ever gets to kick out of the Muscle Buster. And then right after that, Joe hits him with the Island Driver, which is another one of his finishers, which Homicide gets to kick out of. And then right after that, Joe then kicks him a few times in the head and chokes him out for the win. And it felt weird because I realized the point is probably, Homicide's one of our top stars. We've got to keep him strong. So let's let him basically survive things that no one else survived. But at the same time, it felt like the last move of the match was basically like a WrestleMania main event end, and the rest of the match didn't feel like the most epic end ever. It felt just like a good match between two guys that I think are probably incapable of having a bad match against each other. But what did you think about it, Matt?
I'd say this was my favorite match between the two of them since the first Do or Die match, which we ranked highly in our 2003 match of the year. It wasn't as good as that in terms of drama, but I thought it was definitely better than their last two matches. I thought it was a great match. I would go in the 4.25 star range, probably, honestly. I really liked, Homicide's healing. I liked, there was a spot where he spit on his hands and then raked Joe's back, because I have infection on the brain also.
Oh, God, that must have been a nightmare.
Yeah. One of the early spots that was cool, they very quickly got rid of the Rottweilers to make it like a mano-a-mano thing, right? Low Ki, Rocky, and Julius Smokes all tripped and just Joe at one point. So the referee just immediately got rid of all of them. So they had this one-on-one match. Yeah, and then, there's a lot of Homicide doing eye pokes and stuff. So Joe would be selling his eye. At some points, Nolte was good here, mentioning that Homicide's best bet is to keep Joe in the ring. But then at other points, he went too far with it. He said that if you had to choose between Joe and Homicide, which one would be more comfortable in a street fight? He said it would be Joe. And he's like, I just think, if you look at both of their matches, Joe just does more of those kinds of matches. And I'm just like, okay, we have watched every ROH match so far on the main shows. How many of Homicide's matches were brawls? A lot. A lot.
One of the first segments in Ring of Honor history that introduced Homicide was him standing in a New York street talking about how he's from the street, and he is literally his gimmick early on. It was I'm a street fighter. Yeah, and you can tell Gabe's trying to fight against it, but being polite, like,
Yeah, exactly. He's like, I don't know, Mark. That's kind of a toss-up. He literally says that. Meanwhile, in his first year on ROH, Homicide stabbed 2 people in the head. H.C. Loke and Steve Corino. He's had barbed wire matches. He's had crazy ladder brawls. He beat Samoa Joe once by choking him out with a noose. Like, it's just, yeah. One of his favorite tools is a fork. Like,
it just goes back to, like, it's one of those things that it's still kind of. I don't think Mark. I wouldn't know for sure. I don't think he really did all his research. Like, I don't think he watched those shows.
But like, the guy's name is Homicide. You don't have to do much research to figure out what his gimmick is.
He's trying to be like, yeah, when you put it that way, it's insane. Like, yeah, I think Homicide's the one that's more of the pure wrestler here. It's like Homicide is his name.
But like, yeah, if anything, it's like the thing that usually surprises people about Homicide is how much wrestling he does. Usually, the default assumption is that he's a street fight guy. So, like, I don't know, Mark. But I thought the match was really good. I thought, I liked Homicide, taunting the crowd, and then Joe hitting the enziguri from the floor after Homicide, like, pretends that he was going to do the tope. He does that a few times where he teases the tope, and then, like, and Joe always will, like, kind of make him pay for fucking around with it. But, yeah, at one point, Homicide blocked the ole ole kick with an enziguri, then tried to do his own ole ole kick, but Joe, like, overhead threw him on the floor. And I loved Homicide's sell here, where he, like, sits up and, like, kind of, like, jumps around the floor like he's hurting so much.
He punches the railing, then butt scoots like he's a dog on a carpet, and then, like, runs in a circle on the floor like he's the Three Stooges or Homer Simpson.
Yes.
It's like an amazing sequence.
He literally does that. No, I'm just kidding. But it would be great if he did.
That would be 5 stars. I would give this 5 stars if he did that.
Yeah, but at this point, Joe is either really tired or selling being really tired, because there are a couple of moments where he's just, like, stopping for a while and checking his eyes. I think it's selling. And then it's a unique kind of selling because it does seem real. But Joe is like, so before those big moves, Joe is like avoiding a lot of Homicide's comeback moves and hitting him with his own big moves. The big snap power slam, a tiger driver, a cobra clutch suplex, like all kinds of cool stuff. Homicide even does like a half pile driver, but because he couldn't get Joe up. But he got 2. At this point, you're right. Gabe goes into like WrestleMania mode. Homicide does his lariats, and Joe does his fighting spirit scream until Homicide finally knocks him down. But then Joe blocks another, does the slap, the Cobra Cut suplex, like I said. The Muscle Buster gets 2. The Island Driver gets 2. I actually thought it was cool. Like, I thought, because ROH doesn't do this a lot, at least at this point, the spamming finishers and kickouts, right? I can't really think of too many matches where they really did that in ROH so far. Can you?
No, and I thought it was a great, like, exciting final. I just thought it was a little, like, it just felt like the rest of the match kind of surprised me at how, and I agree with you, by the way, what you said at the start, which was, this is the best match I think these two have had since Do or Die, and I would probably put my rating for it at 4 stars, like right below your 4.25. Mm-hmm. But I did think it was interesting where the rest of the match felt like kind of restrained in a way, and then the last minute is kind of like what you would expect for a final match where they're just doing giant finishers. You
felt it was a little bit incongruent. Yeah, but what I liked is that I think like the fact they don't do it very often, and they thought Homicide deserved it. Homicide deserved to get to kick all these big moves, and I think it's true. I think after everything, and you still need to keep him strong, and he's still going to be feuding with Joe, just not having singles matches. I think that it's good. Like, I thought, like, I probably would have booked it the same way, honestly. Maybe not exactly the same, but having Homicide kick out of the big moves, I think that's like a fitting end to this feud. And Joe finally just has to go psycho on him and choke him out, and he does, and then he won't release the hold, and that's where we get our ending sequence.
Yeah, I just have a couple more notes I want to get to from the match. There was a couple other really cool moments. I thought Homicide did this great flying knee to the back of Joe's head that looked good. I also thought, like you mentioned, Joe did the Tiger Driver. I thought those were like the kind of cool moments that these two always kind of break out where they always change up little things. Like Joe does the power bomb, and normally when the guy kicks out, he turns into the STF. But here, Homicide kicked out like and pushed himself away too far from Joe. And I don't know if that was intentional or not, but then Joe immediately does the Tiger Driver, which I don't know. He rarely breaks that out, at least here in Ring of Honor at this time. And it's just stuff like that that was really cool. And again, I think these two are incapable of having a bad match against each other. Nothing other than do or die, what I think is really like a classic match, but they're all either very good or great on their own. Matt, before we get to the end segment, though, I just wanted to ask you if you noticed this. One more, I don't want to pick on the guy, but I like this Mark Nolte bit of commentary. Mark Nolte talking about this feud, he said, and I quote, "Nothing breeds hatred more than former respect." Matt, I sat and thought about this for like 5 minutes and tried to make. I tried to think, is that true? Is there any way that could be true? I really don't think that nothing breeds hatred more than former respect.
No, like the thing is, Hitler used to really respect the Jews.
That's why he hated them so much. He respected them so much at first.
Yeah. No, that's ridiculous. But it is a very like a wrestling thing to say. You know what I mean? They were bitter friends, but now they're stiffer enemies. I will say this about the match. One thing I want to say, I even fell for the Muscle Buster as the near fall. I thought that was the finish. Then I thought the Island Driver was the finish. So even like 15 and a half years later, I bought into these near falls. So I think those are good near falls.
And I had this weird feeling where I was watching those near falls, just like you, I forgot them. Where I was like, when I was watching, even though I felt what I was thinking before, like you said, that's a bit incongruous. That's a great way of putting the words on what I was saying, way more eloquently than me. But when I was at the same time, when I was watching those moves, I was also kind of happy because I was like, good for Homicide that they're giving him this much, because I did feel like he deserves to be more than just another scalp for Joe. So I did really, like you, I was glad that they gave him all of that to try and differentiate. Like, yes, he loses just like all the rest, but he took more than anyone else.
Right, exactly.
So, and also I mentioned earlier that Homicide was escorted to the ring by the Rottweilers. I should note that they all get sent to the back very early on. So for the most part, this is a straight up wrestling match. After the match, Joe won't release the choke, like Matt said, and the ref has to call staff from the back to try and get them to pry Joe off. He won't release. The Rottweilers then run back in. They stomp Joe. They get him to release by stomping on him. Smokes in particular just goes insane, and he chokes Joe himself, which I thought was funny. Low-key puts a choke of his own on Joe. Nolte wonders, where is anyone to help Joe, which is he's continuing to do that thing I complained about earlier, where he's asking a question a commentator probably shouldn't be asking. Although this time Gabe actually bails him out. He says, I think most of the wrestlers are already driving to Chicago for the show tomorrow night. So Gabe kind of gives a good reason why no one would be bailing out the face. And he also says, and the Briscoes and the Saints are preparing for their main event. Homicide then gets on the mic, and he says, while this might be the last match between him and Joe, it's not the end between Joe and the Rottweilers. Rocky Romero, Key, and Homicide all spit on the Ring of Honor World title and then toss it on Joe's body. And then Gabe says in a line, Matt, I know you were intrigued by. Gabe says, they have raped the belt of its dignity multiple times. Gabe really liked this line.
Oh, God. And the way he says it, they're raping the belt of its dignity. They're just, and he like really highlights the word rape. He's like, they're raping the belt of its dignity. Gabe had quite a night on commentary tonight.
I thought this was a solid beatdown to keep the feud going, but the only thing I didn't like about it was Joel holding on the choke, because I felt like if it made sense because the feud, Homicide done some pretty horrible things to Joe before this, like throw a fireball at him. But at the same time, I think on this night, like, it kind of makes the Rottweilers look justifiable for beating Joe down afterwards, because like he wasn't going to release that choke. They really made a point to show you like, no, he's going to murder Homicide if these heels don't save their friend's life, which it's kind of a little bit of a weird tonal shift. I think I just would have let Joe let go of the choke and then have the beat down. But I mean, other than that, I thought this was a good, solid segment to keep everything going.
Yeah, I agree. It was good. I mean, it maybe was a little too similar from of the week to the week before, um, but the spitting on the belt and the taking its dignity is was, I guess, added another layer to it.
And that brings us finally to the Ring of Honor Tag Team Title Best 2 out of 3 Falls main event. The Second City Saints of CM Punk and Colt Cabana successfully defend the titles when they beat the Briscoes, Jay and Mark, 2 falls to 1 in 37 minutes, 29 seconds. The first fall was Jay Briscoe pinned CM Punk in 20 minutes, 12 seconds after he hit the Jay Driller. The second fall was Colt Cabana pinned Jay Briscoe in 26:43 with his weird new leg trappy roll-up that he had been starting to unveil as a new finisher around this time. And the final fall was CM Punk pinning Mark Briscoe in 37:29 after he hit the Pepsi Plunge. Matt, just like the last match, this is the feud ender, the last match we're going to see between these groups or teams for a long while, or in the case of this match, I don't think they ever wrestled again. What'd you think about this as a way to end the show and to end the feud?
All right, well, so this match was a long match, right? Almost 40 minutes. And CM Punk, in particular, has a lot of experience at this point with long matches, right? He had done like 90-minute matches in IWA, he'd done 60-minute matches a bunch of times, including recently in ROH. So he's pretty seasoned, but I don't know how many like long matches the Briscoes have done at this point. And it felt like the first fall really telegraphed that they were going long. In fact, given how slow it was at times, I thought they were going even longer. Obviously, I knew how much time was left on the DVD, but I would have thought that. I don't know. I feel like if this was a couple years later and everyone was more seasoned, they would have done something a little bit less obvious in the first fall in terms of it going long, because they really, really just took their time, did a lot of stalling, chain wrestling and stare downs, and not a lot of stuff. It really got going about 10 minutes in when Punk started beating down Mark in the corner. At one point, even Gabe suggested that Punk was doing the slow it down strategy because he had used it against Joe, as I mentioned earlier. So that, it was very noticeable. I did like some of the stuff in the first fall, like the Saints kind of teasing that they might still be heelish, but really not doing heelish stuff at all. Like, for example, Punk had Mark in the abdominal stretch, and he was like reaching back to Colt, and you almost thought they were going to do the thing where they grab the hand for the extra leverage. And in fact, even a guy in the crowd yelled, "Use the leverage!" But instead, Punk just tagged in Colt, and then they did a double abdominal stretch, which in wrestling logic is actually less illegal than just the holding the guy's hand. At one point, Punk does this move on Mark, and I guess it's sort of like an Indian stretch turned over, but Mark Nolte calls it a reverse double toe hold in a surfboard. And I was like, man, I've been watching wrestling like kind of obsessively for like 30 years, and there are still so many names of holds I do not know. Would you have looked at that and said that was a reverse double toe hold?
No, and I almost feel like when he was saying, I was like, you know what, that makes sense, and I never in a million years would have. I feel like he was figuring that out as he watched it.
Yeah, maybe. Because I thought like, Indian Death, like there's a lot of wrestling hold moves that I just don't know the names of. Once Punk starts beating up on Mark, then they start doing some more like interesting stuff. Jay starts helping turn the tide, and Mark dives onto Punk, and then the Briscoes sort of heel. They work over Punk in the corner. Jay is like taunting the crowd. He's like taunting Cabana. And I think the Briscoes on offense here was more exciting than the Saints on offense. They rip off the corner pad and they throw it at Colt. Jay is just like beating the crap out of Punk's head, like from the floor. At one point, they do a monkey flip on Punk, but Punk lands on his feet and he tags Colt. Then they do this like double team, tag team hold. Jay breaks it up and kind of out of nowhere hits the Jay Driller and pins Punk. So the Briscoes are up 1-0, and from that point, Jay like baseball slides Punk out of the ring, and Punk is knocked out for the entire second fall, which I thought was a nice touch, honestly. But it meant that the second fall was a handicap match. So Mark and Jay are double teaming, but Colt, right? Jay accidentally clotheslines Mark to the floor, but they continue to work over Cabana for a while. They do a lot of double team moves. They hit a big double boot. They go for the that demolition style knee where it's over Jay's shoulder and Mark comes off with the knee. But it's actually a really interesting reversal. Colt holds Jay's head and pulls it in the way of Mark's knee, which I've never seen that before. And that's what allows Colt to get Jay in that weird roll up for 3. So not a super long second fall. I find that second falls often are the short fall. I don't know why that is. It's like a formula thing to do. So then they get into the third fall, and pretty quickly, the Briscoes don't really honor the 15-second rest period. They do the springboard doomsday device, and that's when Punk, as you might have predicted, finally pops in to save Colt. And then it's back to a tag team match. It's funny, right after all that big spot, Jay decides to put Colt in a chinlock, which I was surprised by, but it worked. The crowd got really into it and egged Colt on. Colt almost got the hot tag, but Mark knocked Punk off the apron. So Colt hit a crossbody on both Briscoes and enziguri'd Mark, and then tagged in Punk. And that's when it gets kind of fast-paced, right? Punk does a DDT Russian leg sweep combo. Cabana does a frog splash, and Punk gets 2 on that. Nolte ping-pongs between Punk and Cabana's forearms. Mark backdrops Punk over the top onto Cabana and Jay, and then Mark goes to the top. And Gabe goes, Mark is crazy. There's no telling what he'll do. So he does the shooting star press he does every time he's in that situation. So then Cabana hits an acai moonsault onto everyone. And then they do a very classic ROH tag team spot where Mark ducks the Shining Wizard and enziguri's Punk. Then Cabana lariats Mark. Then Jay Yakuza kicks Cabana. Then Punk boots Jay. And so it gives a moment for everyone to be kind of down so everyone can cheer and chant ROH. ROH does that a lot in their tag team matches, but it definitely worked here. It was built up to for a long time. Mark stopped Punk from Pepsi plunging Jay and did a springboard ace crusher. Then Cabana dropped Jay over his knee. There was a double cover there and a kick out. Kind of exposing right there that the referee waited till both guys were covering to pin, given that Mark had done his move way before. But Mark hit a cutthroat driver on Colt. Punk broke that up. Then Punk escaped the cutthroat, hit the Pepsi plunge on Mark, got the cover. I thought the third fall was very fast-paced, exciting. The first fall I felt telegraphed things too much, but it got exciting when the Briscoes took over. But I thought all in all it told a good story. It might have been kind of formulaic, but I thought it was a really good match. I don't think it was maybe quite as good as their first match in Chicago at Reborn Stage 2, but I thought it was very good. I don't know what to give it star rating. Maybe in borderline 4 stars. I don't know. I enjoyed it a lot, though.
Yeah, I would give this 3 3/4. So I'm right, probably exactly feeling about it how you did. I thought this match was kind of the opposite of the last match, where both of these matches are the end of feuds. But I felt Homicide and Joe, they did something that was kind of different. I felt this was kind of just a longer version of everything they've done before. But I don't think I don't see that as a bad thing. It just kind of felt like these guys that were getting really comfortable with each other, and it was just a longer version because, like you said, you laid out all the major beats. This is a very story-oriented match, and it feels like a lot of these Punk Cabana tags from this era are kind of old school, where they follow a very traditional story and structure where everything makes sense and it's all in parts. And so in this match, yeah, you get the first fall, which is normal until Punk gets taken out, and then the whole second fall is about Colt having to beat the odds 1-on-2 and get an upset pin, and then the third fall, Punk saves the day in the nick of time, and then Colt eventually makes the hot tag to him, and then finally we get that standard kind of Ring of Honor final few minute run where everyone's ignoring tags and we get some bigger moves. But Punk and Cabana tags are never really about thrill a minute super big, even though you do get plenty of action. I don't think the match ever really gets too slow, but it's never about just big spot every 15 seconds. It's more, their matches are more about some big spots, but we're kind of telling a story and we have a very clear structure. And I thought this was a good match for that, except just like you said, they probably could have cut out the first 5 or 10 minutes of this match and still not just cut it out because, oh, the match is too long, but because all that story beats that we just described, none of them are in the first 10 minutes. Like, it felt like they just tacked on an extra 10 minutes at the start just to have a longer match. Like, you could have cut that out and not lost any of the story. And the first 10 minutes weren't bad, but it's just like you said, you could tell they were wrestling in a way where you can tell they're just doing this because they have a lot of time and they need to fill it. And it's almost like this is like an extra mini match before the match they actually have planned. And then once it kicks in, then gets to be a match where I didn't feel like, oh, this is just extra stuff. I felt like, oh no, this all makes sense. There's a reason why all this is here. You also, I feel like, nailed the best spot where Colt pulls Jay's head down in that demolition decapitation knee. A really cool counter that I don't recall ever seeing before. That's one of those moves someone should lift nowadays if they see it. It's just a really cool counter. Find opponents that do a demolition decapitation, I guess, so you can steal that.
Did the Briscoes ever do it anymore?
I'm not sure, but the one other cool spot you kind of mentioned, but you didn't mention one part of it, which I thought was there's a moment in the match where Punk is getting beat down and he's sitting on his butt in the corner, and one of the Briscoes goes to pull him out by the feet, and you think, oh no, Punk's going to do that thing where he like gets pulled up from by his feet, and instead of just landing flat on his back, he like flips and lands on his feet. And that's actually how he tagged out. He then ran to the other corner and made the hot tag in their last match. And I know this because in this match, I think Mark even yells at Jay during this, and the announcers point out too, no, remember last time. And so they actually do not then do that move, and then instead do the move you described, which is where one Briscoe monkey flips the other into Punk, and then Punk or he monkey flips one of the Punk, and then Punk lands on his feet out of that and immediately makes the hot tag. So I felt like that was a really nice little, not just a callback, like they literally pointed it out verbally. They were like, hey, everybody, look at this. We've learned something. And I like when they reward you in that way for watching older matches. And so, yeah, this is, again, not probably 10 minutes too long. But at the same time, I was never really bored by it. But I also felt like it probably would have been even better as like a 30-minute match instead of a near 40-minute match. But yeah, a fun way to end the feud. And like you said, the Briscoes healed a bit, although they never really, especially compared to the Homicide performance, they never healed that bad. It just felt more like they had an edge to them and were healing a bit. And I guess that was the point, because at the end of the match, all four guys shake hands.
Right. They're still baby faces. Yeah.
Yeah. The Briscoes are doing what it takes to win, and they're willing to cross a line, but they're not like, it's not a blood feud like the Homicide match.
Right.
But yeah, and again, it's kind of weird, but that ends the show because, again, no backstage segment. So the end is just them shaking hands and then a minute or two of Punk and Cabana celebrating. Yep. And that brings us to the end of the show. This is a shorter podcast for us, but we still, I guess, have to give our opinions on what we thought of this show. I thought this was it was a good show. It's weird. In a way, it kind of feels like a Ring of Honor B show. Like, it's not quite the same effort maybe as some shows, but yet there was a lot of big matches on this show. Like Shelley and Williams is a good singles match to get. And then, technically you had two feuds ending on this night, even though it didn't feel like necessarily like a huge show in that sense. It's still, when you think about kind of like, the Homicide and Joe feud is wrapping up, at least the singles part of it. This tag feud is wrapping up.
The return match of Low Key, the big angle with Alice in Danger.
And there was a lot of good, I believe it feels like there's a lot of matches on this show that I think one of us or both of us would rank like 3 3/4 or right on the verge of 4, and then maybe Joe and Homicide we'd put a little above that. But like, there's a lot of very good matches on the show.
Yeah.
The Gen Next tag too, really good.
Honestly, I would say in the ring, this is one of the best ROH shows ever. Honestly, in terms of consistency and quality. Like, obviously it doesn't have the epic feel as some other shows, but like, just in terms of like consistently good wrestling and like good wrestling matches, this is up there.
Yeah, it's funny because it's not a show it's almost like, although I would put this in ring wise as better than this show, but like it's almost like the WrestleMania 14 of Ring of Honor shows where there's nothing that's going to be like a match of the year candidate. But I remember at the time the thought about WrestleMania 14 was like pretty much everything is enjoyable on some level.
Yeah, although if you watch back at WrestleMania 14 now, there, a lot of those matches are just not good. They are enjoyable though, but the wrestling here is like quality. Like this is good wrestling on this show.
Yeah, the wrestling. Yeah, and it's just when you stack up all the important things, like you added in some of the other things like Low-Key's return match, more on the show, it kind of shows you how, I think this is a really one of the best periods of Gabe booking, where even on a show where you can say at the end, it was a B show, quote unquote, when you actually think of everything that happened, there was quite a bit of stuff happening on the show.
Yeah, I think this was a really good show. I think this is if anybody were to watch this DVD back now, I think it holds up pretty well, except for some of the tropes. But this was good stuff, quality. Again, not like the most important show in ROH history by a long shot, or even the most important show of the weekend, but it's a good show, like a very good wrestling show.
And so next time we'll be covering Death Before Dishonor 2, Night 2. The very next night they went to Chicago, and that's got another really good-looking lineup. We've got Colt Cabana challenging Samoa Joe for the world title. We've got Low-Key versus Mark Briscoe. We've got Jay Briscoe versus Homicide in a rematch from a recent show. We have the big street fight in the main event, which I remember getting good reviews, and I remember enjoying it. We'll see how it holds up. But Ace Steel and Punk versus Moff and Whitmer. Just another show where you can really tell that the depth, if just looking at the lineup, is really improved. They're really in a golden era for the roster depth because there's just so many good wrestlers and interesting matches up and down the card on paper.
Yeah, I'm looking forward to that one. I remember that being one of my favorites also.
And so for plugs, we've got on Twitter, at Trevor Dame is mine. At Mayor MGF is Matt's. We've got ThROH The Years at gmail.com. That's THROH for through. We have a thread on the plug section of the Pro Wrestling Only message board. And yeah, that's mostly, that's all the plugs, I guess. Matt, it's weird, this show, just because when you take out all the backstage segments, the podcast runs quicker. So I keep looking at the time and going, we're already done. But
well, maybe, I was going to say, maybe that'll incentivize us to get the next one in soon.
Yeah. And what's a short show for us is still probably like a long podcast for rational people.
Yeah,
people that
true.
Don't do wrestling podcasts.
An hour and a half, I'd say, it's still a pretty long podcast.
Exactly. And again, if you want more of Matt and I, we're on the 5-Star Match Game, which should be coming any day now, or might already be out by the time you listen to this. So when you add them together, it's a normal length episode.
That's right.
So until next time, have a good time, have a great time, wash your dang hands.